So what in the world is going on with E3? In 2019, E3 seems to be one of the weirdest places and weirdest things going on in gaming. It's definitely not all bad, but it's just really strange. Obviously, the latest piece of news that kind of kicked this off is today's announcement from Electronic Arts that they're not going to be holding their traditional EA Play press conference, which is part of their EA Play weekend, which it seems like they are still conducting that. But the press conference itself was part of that whole weekend, which is also meant to lead kind of into the beginning of E3 every year, or at least the past couple of years they've been doing that. And suddenly they've announced, hey, we're actually going to be doing just the EA Play event. It's going to be more about people coming to play our games and experience what we have coming up. And they are still going to be doing a few live streams throughout the weekend, which I am going to get into. But for the most part, their live stage press conference that they've been doing is no longer going to be happening. Now, this news comes off of the heels of several announcements over the past few years that some of the biggest players and companies have been kind of shying away from E3 or stepping away or conducting themselves just a little bit differently throughout that week. Of course, EA themselves just starting EA Play a few years ago was part of that. Last year, of course, Microsoft decided to hold their E3 press conference in a completely separate venue away from the E3 Convention Center. Late last year, we know that Sony confirmed they're not even coming to E3 at all, which has been the biggest shocker of this whole thing. And then EA now further committing to doing something different by saying they're also not going to be holding a press conference. Not to mention that in 2013, Nintendo themselves decided to stop holding press conferences altogether in favor of Nintendo Directs and digital events. Of course, they still have a very large presence at E3. They have not left E3 like some people might want to tell you. But they did, of course, make a huge shakeup by deciding not to hold press conferences anymore. And that, in and of itself, was a pretty big deal at the time. Now it's just been, coming up on 6 years, and we're all just very used to it. So what's going on? What does all this mean? Some of these companies changing their approach to E3 or leaving the venue altogether. Now we have EA, who already had left the venue, now not holding their own press conference and instead conducting a couple of live streams throughout the weekend. What does this mean? Well, a few things. I think specifically when it comes to EA, when I hear that they're not doing a press conference, but they are still doing live streams, what I'm envisioning is something akin to a Nintendo Treehouse, which I think even Microsoft themselves had tried to emulate in the past. I also kind of think that Sony was trying to sort of give off that vibe last year, and as we all know, it definitely didn't work and fell flat. I didn't hate their conference because I think their content was fantastic, but their delivery was obviously very awkward and not that great. And so bringing it back to EA, I also think that they're maybe trying to do something different. They might just be doing very detailed, in-depth demos and live streams of games, maybe with some of their developers and partners on whatever game they're showing. And it might actually try to feel like what Nintendo typically does with their Treehouse. And I think that that's great. Hey, we all know Nintendo for all of their dumb mistakes that they make. They also are usually trendsetters in a lot of other arenas. And I think most of us can now see 6 years later that what they've been doing with Nintendo Directs and the E3 digital events has definitely started to impact the rest of the industry. And I think that we might be seeing another case where, because Nintendo has been successful with E3 Directs and Nintendo Directs and Treehouse stuff, that maybe EA is trying to do the same thing. It might not be that, but based on the little bit of information EA has given us with this announcement, it seems like we might get something similar to that. And as far as I'm concerned, that's totally cool. But when we look at the larger picture, it obviously makes us think of the tried and true old conversation of, is E3 losing relevance, with so many big players in the industry, like I said, either changing their approach or abstaining altogether. And, I do think that there's some of that. I think that the importance of the relevance of E3 is definitely shifting and evolving and changing. In some ways, you could maybe spin that to say it's becoming less relevant or less important. I think that there's another angle where it's maybe still very relevant and important, but just how it fits into the larger conversation and to the news cycle of every individual year might just be changing and altering, and that doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, and it doesn't have to necessarily mean the death of traditional E3 and it's just going to be gone in 5 years and what are we going to do? I tend to think that while there is some truth to it, that overall there's probably still quite a bit of juice left in the tank for E3. But I also feel like what's happening with companies like, honestly, the big ones being Sony and EA doing what they're doing, it just kind of feels like in 2019 specifically, if we focus less on the big picture and the all-time future of E3, if we focus just on this year, you know, E3, God, it's just a couple of months away, you guys. Can you even believe it? I feel like we're kind of seeing a situation where there's a pretty awesome path being paved for both Microsoft and Nintendo to really shine, really hit it hard, and really drop the hammer at E3 this year. And that makes me really, really excited, not because I prefer XYZ company over ABC company or what have you, even though you guys know I'm a Nintendo fan and they're my favorite, but I love Microsoft and the Xbox. I'm a humongous fan of Sony and the PS4, and I even like most of the other publishers and developers out there who traditionally hold press conferences as well. I'm actually a really big Ubisoft fan, for example, and Bethesda as well. And so when you look at the fact that Sony specifically not being there, and then EA, it's just like, are Nintendo and Microsoft going to really try to take advantage of this time? And there is a world where they don't, which I think would be sad. It would be very much a disappointment if Nintendo and Microsoft aren't ready to just absolutely kill it and work extra hard because they have so much extra time and space and attention on them this year. I would be disappointed if they didn't really show us what they got. But, you know, hey, that might happen. However, I do tend to think that something like that is going to be what we're going to see. Probably more from Microsoft than from Nintendo, but I do think Nintendo definitely might bring some great stuff as well. When we look at Microsoft, the fact that, you know, yes, all three, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo compete with each other, but clearly Microsoft and Sony are more tied to each other in the competitive space. And I seriously just think that Microsoft might realize Sony's not going to be there, no PS4, no PS5, we're doing all these weird behind-the-scenes things, we're buying up every studio under the sun the last 2 years, we're working on an Xbox Scarlet and an Xbox Maverick and an Xbox whatever that third version is. Are we doing all digital and discless? Are we doing the future? Are we doing a streaming only? I mean, they're doing so much stuff. And this would be the opportunity for them to showcase a lot of that. So whether or not this Xbox One Maverick discless thing that I talked about the other day shows up at E3, that remains to be seen. But I do feel that there is a very, very good chance that Microsoft will be showcasing some sort of new hardware. And I hope it's something more than the Maverick, because the Maverick, to me, if it's real, doesn't, I don't think, get anyone excited or make Microsoft seem like a strong, powerful player and somebody who's ready to help usher in the next generation and try to take back some of the crown that they've lost this generation. They've got to show something new. They've got to show us the Scarlet. They have to show us the future of the Xbox brand. Even if part of that is their digital platforms like Game Pass and Xbox Live, whatever they're doing with that weird stuff, sure, show that and talk about that. Hopefully it is Xbox Scarlet stuff. Hopefully it is just a frickin' crap ton of new games. Give us the blowout on Halo Infinite. Show us some Gears of War 5. Give us, heaven forbid, a new first-party IP. I would love to see a new IP developed or published by Microsoft that could show up as well. And as much as I love shooters, I would like it to kind of be not a shooter or not a Forza game, because Microsoft kind of in the first party space is really stuck in those couple of genres, and I'd like to see them break out with something more first party. So whatever they do, showing us new hardware, giving us a promise of the next generation and really dropping the mic in that respect in the lapse of Sony being there and showing us a ton of new games that we don't know about would go a long way. Oh, and when I say new games, I have to say I mean mostly exclusive. Yeah, show some of the third-party and the multi-platform stuff that you normally see, but also Microsoft, what are you doing that's exclusive to your platform? What will sell people on an Xbox over a PlayStation or a Switch or a Switch 2 or whatever? What is that key factor? What are those games? Show us the exclusive stuff. Obviously, the same holds true for Nintendo, but I think we all know that Nintendo's in a slightly different situation. I mean, the Switch is doing extremely well. They arguably have less to fight for in the here and now, simply because they're doing so well. Their hardware is moving very well. Their software is moving very well. We know they've got a crap ton of games to launch in 2019. And, you know, yes, there's probably a new Xbox and PS5 coming, but we don't know what Nintendo is doing on this front. Rumors about a Switch Pro and a Switch Mini do exist, and I definitely am starting to believe that something like that is going to happen. So maybe they could show that at E3, but I think that those would have to be very special, significant changes to the current Switch to make a big splash at E3 and take advantage of the space, the gap, so to speak, that would be left by Sony and EA not even being there. Also, we have to remember that one of the best feathers in their cap they could have had to reveal at E3 and to steal the show on a software and on a games front was delayed. Metroid Prime 4, until the delay, I had started to believe was just going to be the big E3 blowout, and they were going to try to make that their big sort of overall kind of key game. Their marquee moment would be the reveal of Metroid Prime 4 and then all sorts of great info and gameplay and release date info on that at E3. But plans have since changed. Metroid Prime 4, we know, restarted development. There is no way in hell that game is going to be at E3 this year. And as sad as it is, it's also fine. You know, I can certainly live. I'm ready to wait for the best Metroid Prime 4. I don't care how long it takes. But that also means one of the best surprises we know won't be there. Yeah, they could spend a bunch of time on Pokemon, and on Fire Emblem, and on Luigi's Mansion, and on whatever other game, Animal Crossing. That stuff would be great, but it's not a surprise. It's not a headline maker and a headline grabber. It's not the thing that makes everyone freak out and go, oh my god, Nintendo's just killing it. Who knew they were doing something so awesome? That could have been the first full reveal of Metroid Prime 4. Or it could also be another game. I mean, I don't know if bringing back like F-Zero or Pikmin would really be like headline makers, but they certainly would be big news in the Nintendo community, absolutely. So it would be great to see that kind of stuff. But anyway, I don't actually want to end up turning this into a predictions podcast for Nintendo and Microsoft, more than what I've already done, because that's kind of a different conversation. I want to wait till we get a little bit closer. The point I'm trying to make is, in lieu of Sony and EA and all these companies changing and not coming to E3 and all this stuff, Nintendo and Microsoft have a very interesting path, where they might be able to make a bigger, louder sort of presence and louder sort of boom within the industry than they would have if there were more of these companies, specifically Sony, showing up to the show like normal. There's just a lot more space for these two guys to breathe. They're two of the main three console manufacturers. Nintendo, the biggest first-party producer of their own software. I mean, this is the time. Like, if one or both of them come and they kind of drop the ball and it's just a meandering, average E3 showing and presence, I mean, it's not like it's going to actively hurt them any more than any other year, but I think it would just be one of the biggest cases of a missed opportunity and wasted potential. So E3 is skipping the press conference stuff this year. Whatever they're going to do is going to be fine. No one really cares. Sony is not going to be there. I think it's a calculated move. I think that they're going to really wow us at the end of the year or early in 2020, and that's fine. But Nintendo and Microsoft, man, you guys got to bring it. Microsoft, I'm looking at you, man. I want to see what Microsoft is going to do, you guys. I'm actually fascinated by how this is playing out without EA and Sony. I think Microsoft are the key players to watch. Even though Nintendo's my favorite, Microsoft are going to be the ones who have everything to win or lose, I think. And they're the ones who could wow everyone and really pull the rug out from under Sony if they just kill it this year and show off some amazing stuff. So whatever's going to happen, who knows? But E3, man, times are changing. Anywho, those are my thoughts, man. Pretty interesting stuff with EA's change and what's going to happen with E3, Microsoft, Nintendo. What are you guys going to do? I'm really curious to see, man. It's weird. You would think that you would be, or I should say, I would be maybe less excited about E3 because, man, no Sony, no EA press conference. Even though they're usually bad, it's still entertaining to see what they're going to do. All these things are changing, but I'm actually weirdly more excited because it's such a huge shakeup, and I think that it's got to be kind of a fire under the ass of the other guys to do something more extraordinary and special than they maybe would have otherwise been bringing to the show. So, you know, time's going to tell. We'll just have to see. E3's only a few months away, guys. So tell me what you think about this news about EA. How do you think this factors into Sony also leaving and Microsoft and Nintendo? What do you expect to see at the show from these two guys? I think it's going to be really crazy. So this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you guys next time on another video.